Okay. Good morning, everybody. Happy Sunday. Um, so I was talking a little bit about earlier about when I was taking the dog for a walk this morning, and I heard the beautiful sound of the woodpeckers. But what came to my mind was, my gosh, they're pounding their head against the tree, and it's so cold. I can't imagine how comfortable that must be. And that was my story that I was giving to that scene. Ensure that the woodpecker didn't, is just doing its thing, right? But in my world, I was like, it's cold, and this guy's banging his head against the tree, and that stinks, right? Um, and which kind of really encapsulates what um, I am reflecting on today. And so with that, I'm going to start out with this scene that is it's very very much part of the tradition. So Siddhartha, before he left the temple, or before he left his home to go out and uh, become an ascetic, he saw this scene. Sometimes in the early hours of the morning, it was, as the chronicles tell us, the first full moon of spring. Siddhartha looked around him in the shadowy hall and saw a chilling sight. The dancers lay snoring in the postures in which they had fallen asleep. And in the moonlight, the bodies that had seemed so lovingly silked up, makeup, looked coarse and offensive in their disarray. Right? So before he left, one of the things that his father wanted to do was kind of protect him and insulate him from the outside world. And he became more and more aware of the outside world through his experiences. And when this event, this walking through the hall and seeing what had been such a beautiful event, right? Everybody's made up. They're putting their best foot forward. The beauty, the majesty, right? And then eventually it all falls apart, and these people are laying around, snoring, probably drooling, disheveled. At least that's the kind of the idea that he gets. So the contrast is quite impactful, and it was impactful for him because it really solidified in some ways the facade. And what is that facade that I'm talking about? It's the facade of our stories of our mind, the facade, that those things that we tell ourselves of what's actually true and what's not in our lives and in the world around us. Which brings me to another point, which I wanted to focus on, is boredom. I'm not sure if anybody has ever experienced boredom, but it can be very interesting. When boredom strikes me in my world, I tend to want to do something that entertains myself. I tend not to want to necessarily sit with boredom. Boredom opens up a door of questioning what the heck's going on. It opens up the door of can't open up the door of self-doubt. You get your critical mind going. All of these thoughts might come in. Unsatisfactoriness, dukkha, right? Boredom it pierces that suffering idea, right? That suffering experience, boredom. So our culture in which we walk around feeds on boredom. It is geared toward unsatisfactoriness with ourselves. So, in other words, if I'm bored, what can I fill that up with to feel some sort of okayness? And there's all kinds of things that we can do, from TV to our phones to, well, when you look, let's say we go to a doctor's office and we sit in the lobby, we're not quite sure what to do. So we get the magazine and we start flipping through the magazine, or we get our phones and we start doing that, right? And that's that compelling nature in us to fill that void, to fill that boredom or that anxiety. There's something I must do. There's something I must do. There's something I must do about it. So this past week, I decided I'm going to just sit with that boredom when I experience it. And given the state of the home, a lot going on, right? And when that settles down, there can be that kind of void of how am I going to fill that? And there's that sense that I noticed that comes in of like, what to do now? What am I going to do now? And so there's been times when I was like, okay, I'm just going to just sit here and not do anything about it. And just be there. And what I've discovered is that once you kind of move and you're moving and you're moving and you're moving and you're sitting and you're tolerating it, even though it might not be very tolerable, right? As you go, but you're sitting there and you're breathing and you're just being there. At some point, that boredom moves into more of an awareness of just being there, right? Just kind of flows in that. And you don't necessarily have to fight the situation. Your mind may be telling you something different, though. It might be telling you, what you could be doing, what needs to be done. It could be questioning, why all of these things might be jumping into your mind. The tolerance of being with your mind through all of that, though, that's being very patient, very compassionate towards yourself, even though that ego part of you is pushing you elsewhere. I would imagine that the people in that party for the Buddha were stimulated like that. In other words, that they were playing their role, doing their thing, and at some point that stimulation exhausted itself, and they just boom, right? There was nothing more to do, and so they fell asleep because they were bored. So in other words, they were trying to fill the void. and and seeing that, right? If you see that and you're aware of it, it's quite it, it it's quite illuminating, because you can see it happening around you. You can see that the stimulation moving around you, moving around you, moving around you, and you're participating in it, right? And then you can see that when I step out of that, and I'm allowed to just allow my mind to just to be, right? How intense, and how, of course, people are going to want to fall asleep and get away from it. Of course, they're going to want to do other things to distract themselves from that experience, because it's an intense experience of of that stimulation. And then you get into that boredom, and it calls for that. It's calling for that intense stimulation. Boredom calls to that. Fill that void. Fill the void. And I think that in some ways that's kind of what those people in that hall were doing. They were filling that void. Why they fell asleep? They had to get away or try to do something about it. So kind of falling asleep, and you get into this dream state, into this dream world, right? And it's just another more type of stimulating experience. So I think that his seeing that, it's just another way of opening his eyes to, wait a minute, this is not, it's not what it seems. It's not necessarily the way out, the way through. In actuality, the way through is just being able to be patient with yourself and your mind, to be able to sit there and notice how you're feeling, and allowing that to cross over to that state of being, just being, without any ideas of what should or shouldn't be right or wrong, the concepts that get in the way of how we're to live our life. There's so in this book, No Death, No Fear, by Thich Nhat Hanh, there's a remanifesting ourselves in the ultimate dimension. We have never been born, and we will never die. In the historical dimension, we live in forgetfulness, and we are really rarely truly alive. We live like dead people, and that's what he's talking about. He's talking about living in that stimulated life, that distracted mind. I can't tolerate being bored. I can't tolerate that. So I got to do something about it. And that's very different from being. That's very different from being. Being is, there is no coming, there is no going, there's no death, there's no life. It's just being. And it's a good exercise to do whenever you feel yourself feeling that tinge of boredom, or that tinge of frustration, of, I don't know what to do with myself. Because we've all been there. And, you know, it's it can be a little bell, bing, you know, allowing yourself to just, oh, I'm really feeling this intense, I don't know what to do. What can I do? And then do nothing. Do nothing. Just allow it, and then breathe and allow it to go. Just allow it to flow. And it'll settle into itself. You will settle into yourself. All that other noise is just noise. It's just noise. It's a story. It's settling into yourself. Had I been settled into myself, instead of enjoying the woodpecker this morning, I was going, my God, his head's got to be hurting. It's cold out, and he's hitting his head against a tree. So I had to be doing something. My mind had to be doing something. And that was like, oh, wait a minute. No, I don't. I could just, okay, let it move from my thinking mind into my being. It's so simple, and yet we get in our own way so much. So there's this Zen response. This, just this. Thank you.